Preliminary to what we'll be doing next week in regards to John's question, are you the one? We'll get into that more next week. But before, in Luke, in writing this gospel, he put these incidents, these two little incidents in here to emphasize ahead of time, I think, what it said. I'm going to jump way ahead and give you a quick look at Jesus' answer when he asked that question. In the 22nd verse, he said, he replied to the messengers, "Go back and report to John what you have seen and heard. The blind receive sight, the lame walk, those who have leprosy are cured," and so forth and so forth. My guess is that Christ was busy all the time doing things like this. It said the world could not hold all the books if we tried to identify or tried to write down everything he did. We have two incidents here, very interesting, but somehow we need to recognize that how great God is. You say, "Well, I know how great God is." Well, then why don't you do what he says? We talked about that last week. Why do you call me Lord and do not do what I say? Why do you say that you believe that and not be under my authority? We are under his authority. We sometimes just don't walk it or think it. We kind of get sidetracked and go our own merry way without giving much thought to it. But let me start in the first verse in 7. When Jesus had finished saying all this. Now, this is referring back to what we were talking about last week, judging others, the tree and its fruit, the wise and foolish builders. But when Jesus had finished saying all this in the hearing of the people, he entered Capernaum. Now, Capernaum was the city he had sort of made his home, if you will, sort of made his part of his, or the place where he stayed most of the time. It's a small city, as we talked about earlier. It was a small city in the northwest corner of the Sea of Galilee. It was an important fishing village. And here we get a sense today of some of the importance of that, because there was a centurion there, which the Roman government had their police, if you will. This is the centurion, or the Roman group, Roman police force, if you want to call it that, although it wasn't. It was more of a military unit. But that was an important enough city that they had one there. And the centurion gets his name from the fact that he handled about 100 soldiers, and that's what his job was. And very, very well thought of. It seems like every time the Scripture talks about a centurion, it's from a positive viewpoint. If you know, Peter went to a centurion and led them to Christ. They asked him to come. He was a follower of the way, if you will, and he had a dream. We know about that. Well, I hope you know about that, but that was another case where a centurion was involved. And this centurion was apparently active. He built the synagogue and so forth. We're going to find that out very quickly here. But he was active with the Jewish nation, although he was not a Jew. He was a Gentile, as you and I are. But he had faith in the group, and he worked with them. So there's a centurion's servant. Now, some of the translations, most translations say servant, some of them say slave, but I think in this case he was owned by the centurion, but whom his master valued highly. Now, I was trying to think of a parallel to that. I had a mower that I mowed grass with for 15 years, I think, before I got my new one, and it wasn't working well. It was sick. And I know you think a human ain't that way, but folks, we have to realize that in that day and time, that was property. They were people. I don't know what they did with their old ones. I don't know but it was not a pleasant place for the slave to be, and it was chattel mortgage. I mean, they just owned that person, and the fact that he was of great value to him is probably why he was concerned that he was sick. Like my mower, I mean, it was not working well, so I had to get it fixed. But if you can think in terms like that, we don't really relate to anything like that. It's hard for us to see how somebody can be that kind of a slave. But the Syrian servant, whom his master valued highly, was sick and about to die. And he didn't want that to happen, not because he was a favorite member of the family, although they could end up loving their slaves and thinking very highly of them, just simply from person to person. But it was property. But the centurion heard of Jesus and sent some elders of the Jews to him. It's interesting that now in the I think it's the 5th chapter of Matthew, it has the same story, we think, but some differences. And there it talks as if the centurion went himself, but it would be easy to understand at that time that if you had spokesmen and you were important enough, those spokesmen were thought of as you. Certainly when the king did that kind of thing. And we have some of that today. So that's not an issue, or at least not in my mind. I'll let you make up your mind. But in that case, it speaks as if the centurion came. In this case, I think Luke was probably being more detailed and had his purposes. But the centurion heard of Jesus and sent some elders of the Jews to him. Now, not necessarily the priest, but some high influential people in the Jewish community of the time. And there was other people there, so the Jewish community wasn't the only community there. But the elders of the Jews to him, asking him to come and heal his servant. Now, as we know, this had been going on for a while, and Jesus had been around for a while, and there had been a lot of people cured, a lot of amazing things happen, and the centurion is going to hear of that. And this is going to be his opportunity, he feels, to have his servant healed, because Christ was healing a lot of people. When they came to Jesus, they pleaded earnestly with him, "This man deserves to have you do this, because he loves our nation and has built our synagogue." So he was very active with the group and used that as a control, I guess, or as an influence to get them to do him a favor by healing this property of his. So Jesus went with them. Now, we have a problem, I think, of thinking in terms of this as a recipe. I knew I'd probably forget that word if I want to come by it real quick, but we think of it as a recipe to force God to do what we want him to do. And I think we have a problem with that. Are we God's servant? Are we under his authority? Or do we want God under our authority? This is not a formula of how, if you're active enough and if you're give enough money and you have enough influence with the local church leaders, elders, what have you, then you can get God to do what you want him to do. If we're under authority, understand it's what he wants. Completely, purely what he wants. And I'll get into that in a little bit.